do you measure character? Somebody tell me how to measure character. Character!
Films are about their endings. It's the end of all the thematic roads. It's what the audience has paid their money for. You'll hear the words true character bandied around in screenwriting forums, and people like to say it a lot. It's another one of those buzz phrases that has a meaning, but not everybody uses it the same way. You know, it's a bit like strong character. What does that even mean? So, true character is what emerges when a character is faced with an appropriate crisis. It's revealed by what they decide to do when faced with a worthy dilemma that challenges their core principles. This is often referred to as the crisis scene or the crisis moment. It's in most films in some fashion and at varying degrees, but more often than not, it's just shoved in there or sort of only done by half measure, and that usually explains your lukewarm reaction to a film. So this scene, for example, this should have been really awesome, but you just don't quite feel enough, and the reason for that is because it's just not built in enough into the script. See, this should have been built in the first act, and so when we come to this moment, you're supposed to feel like, yeah, fuck yeah, but you don't feel that. You kind of go, yeah, 2 + 2 = 4. The crisis moment is by necessity near the end of the story, although there are special cases where it happens earlier. But in general, because your movie is probably a hero's journey, your story will convey a protagonist's linear path from ignorance to enlightenment, so you're going to want your crisis to be in the final act. I say final because even though 3-act structure is the ubiquitous norm, it's not always necessary. So your hero has been going on their quest, they've encountered obstacles, they've been pushed, but not far enough, not to their absolute limit. Your hero cannot elevate to that place of knowledge without a truly worthy test. This is where the crisis appears. You get this right, you've got a movie. A crisis scene has to be tailor-made for that specific character's deepest values. Let's say your character is a lawyer who's always got his way through nefarious, under-the-table deals. He's abused the legal system to get rich. He represents criminals who keep him on their payroll. He's never been a truthful, honourable lawyer, and everyone knows him as the guy who will do anything to win the case. Anything. Now, in your movie, he's taken on the impossible case, where he's defending an innocent man on a murder trial. But this is the case he's determined to do right. All through the movie, he's resisted opportunities to do shoddy deals and do things to influence the trial. But right in the final act, something comes up, and his only choice seems to be that he has to do something totally illegal. But it will get an innocent man acquitted. It's guaranteed, but it is something he has to keep secret from his client. So he has to choose between the integrity of the justice system and his own moral compass. I'm speaking in general terms here, but you get the idea that this would be an appropriate crisis tailor-made for this specific character. The structure of this film has been such that it's taken this character from a selfish abuser of the justice system to a believer in its foundational values. But now that's really put to the test, where he has the chance to win the big case, get an innocent man acquitted, but it means he has to sell his soul. Again. Now, what he decides to do tells you this man's true character. If he decides to forego the sure bet and put his trust in the legal system and his own abilities as a lawyer, this runs the risk of losing the case and an innocent man going to death row. Not only that, but all his clients from the past, all the criminals that he's represented, they're going to turn on him. They've got so much dirt on him. If he decides to take the illegal option, he'll win the case. But he'll lose the thing that he's fought so hard to win back, his integrity. Now he has to weigh up what he can and he cannot live with. This is his crisis. I think he decides to forego the sure bet and he puts his client on the stand. And for the last act, we see the potential lawyer this guy spent years squandering. We see what he could have been if he'd been honourable. And he nails it. He wins the case by being a good lawyer for the very first time. But Of course, he loses all his clients, his fortune, and he ends up in prison. Not only does this choice tell you his true character, that he's a man of moral integrity deep down, but it also demonstrates through action the very theme of this film. One moment of integrity is worth more than a fortune made from lies. So this is what people mean when they say story and character are actually the same thing, because the protagonist is an agent of theme. So their actions determine the final outcome of the plot, but their specific choices determine the theme. How do you find the crisis moment? The key is in Act 1. You see, Act 1 is a thematic mirror image of your final act. So Act 1, you'll have a bunch of scenes that set up the story, that establish your hero's equilibrium, but most importantly, it will contain the inciting incident. The final act is where all the stuff you set up in Act 1 pays off. Usually the hero returns home or attempts to recover their original equilibrium after their biggest failure. But all the things that used to comfort them no longer work. This leads to the crisis moment. Look closely at your inciting incident. What it really is a wormhole to the final act. Think of it as one side of a coin, and the crisis scene is the other side of that coin. A crisis must have irony. The irony is set up in Act 1 with the inciting incident and pays off when it appears in the crisis scene in the final act. In my lawyer movie example, the inciting incident would be this. A trusted legal friend comes to our hero with the case. Now, he can't take it on for various reasons, and so he's giving it to our hero. Our hero looks at the case and laughs. Are you kidding me? Now, the friend expected this response and says it just reminded him of an old case. Our hero says, remember, I don't do this kind of work. I only do the sure bet. The friend walks away and says he felt like he owed it to him. You know, it reminded him of the McMurray case. And we think, what the hell is the McMurray case? We learn later that this is the case our hero lost by doing things by the book, and it cost an innocent man's life. So we know this case is all about our hero's redemption. Of course, it would be impossible for me to discuss character and not mention The Wire. This show, in its Shakespearean Baltimore, has countless examples of true character, but I want to focus on just one example. Skip to the next chapter in the timecodes if you want to jump over this case study. Season 2 is underrated because it's still dealing with a lot of loose ends from Season 1 and at the same time setting up a complex plot about these bodies that have been discovered at the docks, plus all the politics going on among the stevedores and the various politicians. It basically all comes down to getting funding for a grain dock, which will bring back valuable trade to Baltimore and work for the stevedores. That's the motivation of Frank Sobotka.
But I'm also talking about the canal. So you're gonna talk about the canal. So the Muldoons who run the old line state, they're gonna talk about the canal until someday, some way that motherfucker gets dredged and we get some ships in here.
Now, Frank is by no means squeaky clean. He's got a hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil thing going on with the Greeks, who are the main supplier of methamphetamine to Baltimore. They bring in their shipments, he loses a container, he gets a cut, he buys everyone around. Now, he's got this son, Ziggy. Ziggy is just not made for dock work. He's the butt of every joke, he fucks everything up, but Ziggy wants to make a name for himself. So he ends up trying to do little crimes, tries to get into the drug trade, but he's just way over his head every time. Ziggy gets ripped off one too many times, and all the humiliation, the disappointment, and the self-righteous rage boils over. And Ziggy goes on a shooting spree. Now, he shoots a valuable connection to the Greeks. So, suddenly, we have a problem. Ziggy's in prison for murder. By this stage, the cops have got everything they need on Frank, and he's arrested. Racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to import heroin, conspiracy to violate federal customs statutes, white slavery. These are the charges they've got Frank on. What do they want from him? Names. Cooperation. The Greeks. The Greeks really want to keep Frank sweet. They had a good thing going, so they decide to get the sole survivor of the shooting to change his story.
What I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna talk with the police. That's right. I'm gonna do to those cocksuckers what they did to me.
You can't do that.
Why not?
They want to meet with us on Ziggy. They can lean on that witness. That kid that he shot, the one that was there in the store. Kid's gonna say that Double G had the gun, that it was like self-defense or some shit. Ziggy could walk, Uncle Frank.
Now we get to Frank's crisis. On the one hand, he desperately wants to right the wrongs of his previous actions. He's determined to make it right by going to the cops and spilling everything. But then he's presented with the ultimate dilemma. Speak to the Greeks again. They can free your son from prison. All they ask is loyalty. If he goes against them, his son will never see the light of day. And Ziggy is not made for prison. Dilemma and a half. I'm not going to tell you what happens. If you've seen The Wire, you know. If you haven't seen The Wire, you're in for a treat. But this is Crisis. This is character. So, if your script has a good plot and it's well written, but people aren't getting hit right here when they get to the end, I'll bet it's because you haven't yet crafted a worthy crisis for your hero. The quality of the crisis is determined by what they hold most dear, or what they think they hold most dear. This is related to stakes. It's not enough to have the world or the whole of humanity at stake. No one cares about that. Something personal for the hero has to be at stake, and this is a window to your crisis. It's really hard to get this right. Work on this more than anything in your script. Clever descriptions, witty dialogue, an amazing action set piece, a great high concept, none of that compares to the crisis. Once you crack the dilemma and you've orchestrated a situation where your hero has to choose between two impossible choices that are crafted just for them, then everything else falls into place. If you've written a whole screenplay, done several drafts of it, and only now think of the best crisis for your hero, but it does mean you'd have to rewrite the whole script, rewrite the script. One final thing to think about here. What you, as the writer, decide that your character chooses in their crisis reveals your own inner truth. It's one of the most rewarding things about being a screenwriter. It's the moment you see yourself in your work. You can't avoid it. Just embrace it. Lean into it. It's so important because you will champion this story now. You'll feel a passion about it that you may have lacked before. When you pitch the story, you'll infuse the pitch with that extra emotion that really translates to an audience. It will actually come off the page too. If you care, others will. Good luck with your crisis, and as I always say, if you're feeling a bit inadequate, just look at what gets made.